A few weeks ago, we talked about free will, and free will recently has actually been bleeding into the courtroom in the discussion around whether or not psychopaths should be responsible for their actions. In today's video, we're first going to look at what this argument appears to be in the courtroom. What are the legal arguments around this? Second, we're going to talk about the problems with these legal arguments. Third, we're going to ask ourselves this question: does this constitute a relief of responsibility? And what does it mean to have responsibility? So let's get started. So what this really looks like in the courtroom is a presentation of certain brain scans that suggest hyperactivity in parts of the brain. And these parts of the brain, like the amygdala, for example, are strongly associated with acts of aggression and kind of impulsive behavior or emotionless behavior. This evidence is used to suggest that the criminal did not have a choice in their action, and they acted in the absence of free will rather than on their own will. So can they really be responsible for their actions? The biggest problem surrounding this, and Michael Gazzaniga in his book Who's in Charge really emphasizes this point, is that just because there's hyperactivity in a certain area of the brain doesn't mean that it's causing the person to act in a certain way. Or uses the example of it being more correlation than causation. The hyperactivity of the brain is correlated with a certain behavior, but it's not causing that behavior. But again, there is statistics that show if these areas of your brain, especially like the amygdala, is hyperactive, you have a higher probability of acting impulsively, but it doesn't cause you to act impulsively. So now we arrive kind of at our final question: does this constitute a relief of responsibility? And I think there's three possible answers to this. One, there's full responsibility for the crime. Two, there's less responsibility. And three, there's no responsibility at all. I think that the third option, that there's no responsibility at all, is out of the question. The science isn't perfectly settled on whether or not we have free will, and I think that an extreme like that, where no responsibility is kind of given to the criminal, I think that that one can be ruled out. I hope that nobody's upset that I'm just kind of cutting that. So now I really want to talk about what Gazzaniga thinks of this situation, as he's very well read in this literature. And he thinks that responsibility is not necessarily located in the brain, rather it's a social contract. So responsibility can't arise in an individual. If you're just you in a vacuum, you can't have the individual characteristic of responsibility. And when answering this question, we have to take a look at the broader context of how our brains personally interact with other people's brains. There's so much scientific evidence that just, facial expressions that express what's going on in our head will actually change what's going on in the other person's head. So if you smile at someone, they're more likely to think of you positively. So you're kind of like inducing that behavior. So again, that plays also into the whole personal responsibility thing, is that our brains aren't acting in a vacuum. And that's what he's really emphasizing, is that our brains are constantly, absorbing information, including information from the people that we are interacting with. And that really kind of turns responsibility into such a gray kind of conversation. Another thing that Gazzaniga mentions, I think it's a very good insight, is that psychopaths and criminals don't commit their crimes when policemen are nearby. They resist. And he asks the question, is this not a demonstration of personal restraint? And I think it absolutely is. Although, again, with the current science and the current technology we have, we can't say exactly what's going on in somebody's brain. But we can analyze situations like this and really respond to that, as in, we know some kind of personal restraint is happening. We don't know if this person is on a certain spectrum of free will, and maybe they don't have free will certain times. But it's clear that they have some level of it. In some level, I don't want to necessarily call it free will, but call it personal restraint. There's been this ongoing conversation about free will, and that discussion has really expanded over the years. And I think that it's very easy to look at free will and see an absence of personal responsibility, but it's interesting to hear Gazzaniga and his perspective on the fact that, with or without free will, personal responsibility still exists. And that's something, again, I find very interesting and honestly quite motivating to own your actions and own your life, and understand that you do have personal agency over who you are and personal responsibility for who you will be. Thanks for watching this video. For more discussions on topics like free will, personal responsibility, apparently crime now too, make sure and subscribe here at Atlas.